In the mid-2000s, the Jason Bourne franchise was a juggernaut. Robert Ludlum's original novels had moved over 290 million copies globally, and the Matt Damon film adaptations were pulling in nearly $1 billion at the box office. Yet, in the video game landscape of the era, the world's most famous amnesiac assassin was completely missing. While stealth action titans like Splinter Cell and Metal Gear Solid were flourishing, Bourne sat entirely on the sidelines. Vivendi Universal Games saw an opening. In 2005, they signed a 10-year exclusive contract to establish a top-tier espionage brand. Their target was clear. They wanted to create a direct rival to the established Tom Clancy portfolio. To survive against established giants, Vivendi knew a cheap movie tie-in would fail. They set out to build what they called a third shelf of Bourne lore, interactive experiences that stood as equals alongside the original books and the blockbuster films. They handed the flagship project to High Moon Studios. Instead of simply recreating the plot of the movies, the developers pitched original missions, flashbacks to the brutal assassinations Bourne carried out before he lost his memory. They translated his lethal training into a mechanic called the Bourne Instinct. By pressing a button, players tapped into the hyper-awareness of a Treadstone operative, visually isolating targets and environmental weapons in a fraction of a second. To ensure they nailed the exact tone, High Moon collaborated directly with the film franchise's stunt coordinators and screenwriter Tony Gilroy. Gilroy mandated that every punch and narrative beat maintain the character's emotional truth. But behind the scenes, there was a major point of friction. Matt Damon explicitly refused to lend his face or voice to the project. His reasoning was highly specific. Damon wanted a cerebral, puzzle-solving game similar to Myst. High Moon Studios, meanwhile, was deep into programming a high-paced, brutal brawler. The two visions were entirely incompatible. Even without their leading man's likeness, the studio delivered. They engineered a critically praised, bone-crunching combat system that successfully made players truly feel like a highly trained human weapon. Vivendi supported the launch with a massive, synergistic marketing machine. They hired world-renowned DJ Paul Oakenfold to compose an original score, kicking off the promotion with live concerts in Miami. They also leaned heavily into real-world cross-promotions. Many USA integrated their iconic Cooper S into the game, distributed demos at dealerships, and set up playable kiosks at live nationwide tours. And the Bourne Conspiracy was only the beginning. Vivendi was actively funding a broader universe, assigning Radical Entertainment to develop an ambitious, massively multiplayer online spin-off called Project Treadstone. Simultaneously, Swordfish Studios was building a third parallel project, a serious, realistic tactical shooter based on Ludlum's Covert One novels. By mid-2008, Vivendi had successfully laid the groundwork for a sprawling, interconnected espionage gaming universe spanning multiple studios. Everything was going exactly to plan. Then, the corporate landscape shifted. Activision merged with Vivendi Games to form Activision Blizzard, creating one of the largest entities in the history of the industry. The new executive leadership immediately implemented a mega-brand strategy. They aggressively pruned the combined company's portfolio, canceling anything that couldn't generate the recurring annual revenue of a franchise like Call of Duty. Bourne faced a direct IP conflict. Activision already owned the video game rights to the James Bond franchise. They had zero interest in funding two competing spy properties under the same roof.
And the earlier friction over Matt Damon's face became the final nail in the coffin. Executives concluded that a Bourne game lacking its movie star was simply too weak to compete against 007. The sudden cancellation left the remaining studios in absurd situations. Swordfish Studios had a functional tactical shooter in Covert One that they suddenly needed to salvage by retooling the code. They pivoted the grim espionage thriller into an over-the-top, rapper-led action game. The remnants of Robert Ludlum's Covert One were eventually released to the world as 50 Cent Blood on the Sand. The Bourne Conspiracy survives today as a hidden gem, proof that licensed games can deeply honor their source material. But its sudden death highlights a harsh industry truth. Even a stellar creative vision cannot survive an incompatible corporate portfolio.